Some pain doesn't yell. It just goes quiet and changes you. Imagine standing at your brother's engagement party surrounded by champagne and fake smiles, then your own father screams, "You're not my son anymore," and shoves you into the fountain like you're trash. And the crowd, they clap. They laugh. Like your humiliation is the entertainment. Tonight's story isn't here so we can cheer when people get what's coming. It's not about judging anyone either. It's about that sharp moment when belonging is ripped away in public. And what a person does next when they're dripping wet shaking and everyone wants them to disappear. So come into this with me, just a little quiet, a little heart. Because minutes after he says, "Remember this moment," the gates open, and the one person they all underestimated walks in, and suddenly, every face in that garden turns pale. My name is Zephyr Caldwell, and I'm about to tell you the story of the night my father tried to bury me in public, and how that moment became the first time I finally stopped begging to belong. But before I share my story, I'd love to know you're here with me and listening to me. Comment hi below or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story can reach because sometimes knowing someone is there makes all the difference. And if you've ever been humiliated by the people who were supposed to love you, please consider subscribing. Not just for me, but because stories like this remind us we're not crazy, we're not alone, and we're allowed to choose ourselves. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. I was back in Charleston. Magnolia Crest Manor looked exactly like the last time I saw it. Too pristine, too staged, like the house itself was trying to convince you it wasn't haunted. 5 years ago, I'd left through that iron gate without a goodbye. Now at 30, I walked back in with a spine made of stone and a single goal: make my appearance at Wesley's engagement party, play my role, nod to the crowd, and put an end to years of whispers that I ran away out of guilt. Let them see me. Let them choke on the fact I returned with my head held high. But beneath all that, I came to find out if the rumors were true. That Caldwell Maritime and Logistics, my family's empire, was quietly bleeding out. The party was a scene ripped from a lifestyle magazine. String quartet playing Bach. Waiters in linen vests weaving through manicured hedges with trays of champagne. Everything white and gold, elegant and cold. The tables were perfectly spaced around the fountain in the courtyard, its icy water glittering under the late spring sun like a stage awaiting a tragedy. As soon as I stepped in, I felt it. The hum of tension. The quiet, curated spectacle. This wasn't just a party. It was a coronation. Wesley, the golden boy, standing tall in his navy suit with his fiancée, Tatum Rowland, beaming at his side. Her family had money, media contacts, and a thinly veiled obsession with image. I counted 3 Charleston media figures, 2 retired Port Authority directors, and several Rowland family members who'd brought their own PR staff. This wasn't about love. This was a press release in motion. I wasn't supposed to be here. I could see it in their faces. I RSVP'd yes, but no one expected me to show. I passed a table where 2 port execs whispered about credit tightening and supply chain insurance packages. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. I caught one of them glancing nervously at my father. And Dane Mercer, CML's CFO, who once avoided me like I was contagious, now stood inches from Gordon Caldwell, like a loyal bodyguard. That was the first red flag. The second came when I saw Wesley dodging eye contact after answering a Rowland uncle's question about quarterly revenue. His words were smooth, but his glance shot to our father for silent confirmation. Something was off. Deeply off. Then my father approached. He didn't say hello. Didn't even fake it. Just walked up jaw-locked like he was chewing on iron. "You really had the nerve to come back?" he asked. His voice cut through the music. Heads turned. I looked him square in the eye and kept my tone even. I RSVP'd. "I came to congratulate Wesley. You ran off like a coward. You left this family humiliated. Now you crawl back in like nothing happened. 5 years ago, I'd left because I refused to lie on a logistics deal that put CML's workers at risk. I tried to expose it. Instead, I was branded disloyal. Gordon rewrote the story and made sure everyone believed it. I didn't run," I said calmly. "I walked away from something I couldn't respect. "You're not my son anymore," he snapped. The words echoed across the courtyard. Every conversation died. Even the quartet stopped mid-note. I should have walked away, but the air turned tight with attention. I knew he wanted this. A public purge. Behind him I saw Marla, his second wife, watching like a hawk, nodding slightly. She was waiting for this exact moment. Then he shoved me. My shoes skidded on the stone. Cold water swallowed me whole. Gasps broke the silence, followed by laughter, then applause. "He's lucky we even let him in," someone said from the Roland side. I rose from the fountain, dripping mascara ink streaked through my vision like war paint. But I didn't scream, didn't flinch. I smiled. Remember this moment. The gates creaked. A low rumble rolled over the gravel path. Black SUVs, matte, silent, purposeful, pulled up. The crowd turned. Security stepped out. People craned their necks. My father's color drained. His jaw slackened. And then Cassian Vale stepped into the sun. Cassian Vale wasn't just a friend. He was the one person who never asked me to shrink. Back in college, we built dreams on bar napkins and dared to think we'd matter one day. Since then, he'd become something else, an enigma in the world of finance and logistics, known in circles where silence costs millions. Today, he stood in a tailored suit, sunglasses shielding unreadable eyes, walking straight through the shocked crowd like the air parted for him. He didn't speak to anyone. Not the media. Not the board members. Not my father, who looked like he'd seen a ghost with a bank account. Cassian walked to the fountain past the dripping stone and extended his hand. I took it. He peeled off his jacket, wrapped it around my shoulders like armor, and said one sentence loud enough for every microphone nearby to catch: "He won't be needing any of you anymore." The courtyard fell into a hush. As we walked away, I caught murmurs unraveling behind us. If Vale's here, CML's in trouble. He's behind the Atlantic Syndicate acquisition last quarter. Did you see Gordon's face? In seconds, the narrative shifted. The exiled son wasn't a punchline anymore. He was a signal, a warning. We got into the car. My phone vibrated nonstop. Missed calls, Gordon Caldwell. Messages, Wesley begging not to make a scene. Emails, Iris Kane from Roland PR asking for a private meeting using phrases like containment and clarify misunderstandings. They weren't concerned about family. They were concerned about headlines. Cassian didn't say much. He never did. But he pulled out a sleek leather folder and handed it to me. "Do you want to see what they're trying to bury?" he asked. Inside were financial breakdowns, vendor replacements, debt disguised as bridge capital, a suspicious cluster of shell companies with overlapping addresses. Some of them used to be reliable names I brought in when I still worked at CML. Now they were gutted and replaced. "This doesn't happen by accident," I muttered. No, Cassian agreed. It happens when people like Mercer play both sides. There's a leak in the hull and they're trying to patch it with PR. We didn't go home. Cassian took me to a hotel near the historic quarter. Quiet, discreet. That night I got a call from Captain Reese, retired now, but once the heart of Charleston's shipping scene. He trusted me back then. Still did. "Zeph," he said, voice low. "There's a shipment missing paperwork. International routing. Dane Mercer pushed it through too fast. Something stinks." It wasn't about the fountain. It wasn't even about being disowned. They were hiding something. And they needed a scapegoat. As I hung up, I noticed an email notification from Iris. She'd attached a draft contingency press release with the headline, "Zephyr Caldwell causes scene at family celebration." They were preparing to erase me again. Make it look like I self-destructed. Cassian stood at the window. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'm taking you to Charlotte. You need to see something. A place where they'll stand when you walk in." I asked, "Who are you now, Cassian?" He turned calm as ever. "The man holding the keys to the only exit your family has left." The elevator ride up Vantage Tower felt like time reversing. 5 years ago, I left Charleston with a backpack and a tarnished name. Now I was being ushered into a glass and steel fortress with a private security escort, and my name on every list that mattered. The marble lobby of the tower bore the logo of Vale Holdings etched into stone, sharp, clean, permanent. No mistaking who ran the show here. Cassian walked beside me without saying a word. He didn't need to. The gesture said enough. I wasn't a guest in someone else's empire. I was walking into a boardroom I now owned a majority of. Inside the room was humming with quiet, expensive tension. A long walnut table stretched beneath pendant lights. Legal counsel, financial advisors, forensic auditors. It was a surgical team ready to dissect something dying. Gentleman Cassian said, calm and precise. This is Zephyr Caldwell. From this point forward, he is not merely involved. He is the primary stakeholder. Silence. Then nods, the kind that signaled alignment, not shock. They had known. Cassian had prepared the battlefield long before I arrived. A woman from the legal team pulled up a slide deck. It broke down the structure Cassian and his acquisition fund had been building quietly for over a year, buying shares through forgotten stakeholders, purchasing convertible debt, acquiring silent proxies from smaller funds. And then came the reveal: 51% ownership in my name. Not Cassian's. Mine. I stared at the numbers, the chain of transfers, the legal signatures. I asked Cassian, why me? Because it was yours to begin with, he said. It wasn't sentiment. It was strategy. No one would expect the disowned son to return as the majority shareholder. That shock alone would disarm everyone long enough for us to act. The auditors took over. Charts, timelines, diagrams. They pointed out 3 specific anomalies. First, a pattern of vendor replacement, all new. All tied to shell corporations with shared back-end addresses in Wyoming and Delaware. Second, multiple insurance contracts signed with extremely high premiums and strange exclusion clauses, designed not to cover risk, but to create layers of legal noise. Third, intercompany transfers to CML subsidiaries that appeared to push debt off the books for quarterly reporting. Smoke and mirrors. The worst part. These moves didn't just put CML in a vulnerable state. They rigged it to implode. One wrong demand from a creditor and the whole structure would fold. Cassian leaned toward me. If this comes to light, the Rowlands will bail. Wesley will be left holding a ring with no bride. And your father, he'll have no one left to hide behind. I nodded. So we don't make it public. Not yet. We agreed to initiate a formal internal review under my authority. Everything looked legal, surgical, and necessary. No press, no noise, just control. But I added one condition: the review meeting would take place at Magnolia Crest Manor. I wanted them to sit in the same house where I'd been publicly thrown into a fountain and forced to drown with my dignity. Just before we wrapped, my phone buzzed. Wesley. You need to stop his message read. I don't know what's happening, but whatever you're doing, it's going to break everything. He didn't sound angry. He sounded lost. Maybe he really didn't know. Maybe Gordon had kept him in the dark, or maybe he was playing dumb. Either way, I didn't reply. Let him wait. I drafted the meeting summons that afternoon to Board of Directors, Senior Management, Caldwell Family, from Zephyr Caldwell. Majority shareholder subject, internal review session date, Friday 10:00 a.m. location, East Conservatory Hall, Magnolia Crest, Manor, attendance mandatory. As I was leaving, Cassian's lead counsel handed me a slim file. Something else you should see. We found this while cross-referencing trust records. The title on the front stopped my breath. Eleanor Caldwell Trust, my mother's name. A trust I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. Inside was a ledger entry and a note in unfamiliar handwriting. It said only one thing: do not allow Gordon to access Zephyr's inheritance. Suddenly, this wasn't about a company anymore. This was about everything they took from me and how much they never expected I'd find again. The last time I stood in the East Conservatory Hall of Magnolia Crest Manor, I was a kid in a navy jacket at my grandfather's memorial, listening to Gordon deliver a speech about legacy. Today I came back wearing silence like armor. The hall was a glass cathedral of power marble floors, soaring columns, morning light flooding in through tall windows. The fountain outside burbled quietly in the distance as if mocking me. I stared at it briefly. No anger, just clarity. That water wasn't my grave. It was a witness. I stepped into the hall at 9:45 alone. No Cassian, no entourage, just me and the weight of my name. Cassian, by design, waited in a private room down the hall with his legal and audit team. If anyone accused me of being his puppet, I wanted them to see there were no strings. By 10:02, they had all arrived. Gordon Caldwell sat at the far end, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Marla sat beside him in a pearl suit, sipping tea like this was brunch. Wesley was flanked by Tatum Rowland, whose expression gave nothing away. Dane Mercer sat near the center, visibly sweating, though he kept dabbing it discreetly. Two of the older directors looked like they hadn't blinked in a while. And beside them, a woman from the independent audit firm I'd hired that morning unpacked her notes. I opened the meeting. This internal review is being conducted under majority shareholder authority. All statements are being recorded and will be entered into the corporate record. Gordon laughed. Are we pretending now? Is this a play you're directing? I didn't flinch. Your comment is noted and will be included in the minutes. Please keep all further responses within the scope of financial inquiry. That shut him up. I walked them through a precise timeline. Vendor changes, insurance contracts, debt structure. Everything laid out clean, clinical, irrefutable. I could feel the heat rising in the room. Mercer looked ready to choke on his own saliva. Then I presented a document. One they hadn't seen. A projection model verified by the audit firm showing that without the restructuring moves Cassian and I initiated through proxy firms, CML would have breached multiple loan covenants. Within 3 months, the banks would have come knocking. Silence. I looked directly at Gordon. You're all here because the company survived something you didn't even know was happening. Not because of you, in spite of you. He stared at the floor. Tatum was the next to speak. Her voice was smooth, businesslike. We'd like Dane to explain the debt ratios before the wedding contract finalizes. The Rowland family expects full financial transparency moving forward. Wesley looked at her like he'd just been stabbed. Wait, he said. What wedding contract? She didn't even blink. There are conditional clauses tied to the merger. So that was it. Love had nothing to do with it. Wesley was only useful if he inherited something solid. Then came my turn to strike. I asked Dane 3 direct questions about a vendor switch, why they changed, who owned the new vendors, and what the service fee clauses were. Dane fumbled. He cited confidentiality. He mumbled about streamlining. I gave the signal. The auditor stood and read a summary: vendor addresses, overlapped invoices, bounced between subsidiaries, consulting fees routed back to an offshore account. The air in the room changed. Then Marla flinched. At the mention of a company called Harbor Bridge Solutions, she turned sharply and hissed something toward Dane under her breath. That was all I needed. I said nothing. But I filed that look. It was proof. I closed the meeting with a hammer. All vendor contracts under investigation are now frozen for 72 hours. Dane, I expect a full paper trail delivered to my office by noon tomorrow. Next session is mandatory in 48 hours. Anyone who misses it will face immediate removal recommendations. Gordon exploded. You're stealing my company. I stood collected, deliberate. I'm not stealing anything. I'm cleaning up what you let rot. As everyone dispersed, the company secretary quietly handed me a scan from the archive. It was a handwritten note from a decade-old board record. My mother's handwriting. Gordon is not to access the trust. It is for Zephyr only. This wasn't just about fraud. It was about a father who buried everything my mother left behind and thought I'd never dig it up. By the time morning rolled over Charleston, I was already across town, far from the manicured gardens and white columns of Magnolia Crest. The docks smelled the same as they always had: diesel and salt-rusted chains and seagull cries, but everything else had changed. I wasn't here to push freight manifests or review yard schedules. I was here to dig. And this time I had a shovel sharper than any they'd seen. Old Captain Reese met me at the corner table of a grimy little cafe that overlooked the bay. He hadn't changed much, same wind-burnt skin, same voice like gravel soaked in bourbon. They started shifting vendors without protocol, he told me straight out. No RFPs, no comparative quotes, just replacements pushed through under executive discretion. And not long after that, a shipment out of Antwerp went missing. But Mercer signed off on it without blinking. I leaned in. Did anyone raise flags? A junior accountant named Lila Grant did, he said. Smart kid. She asked about payment trails tied to a firm called Harbor Bridge. The next week, she was told her position was being restructured. I found her later that afternoon. Not in an office, but in the parking lot of a Publix off Savannah Highway. She was nervous pacing, dressed like she wanted to disappear. I shouldn't be talking to you, she said as she slid into the passenger seat of my car. They've got eyes everywhere. But I can't unsee what I saw. She handed me a folded envelope, screenshots of internal email threads, payment confirmations, and a routing slip showing a high-volume transfer to an LLC fronted by Harbor Bridge. I copied the ledger file, she whispered. It's on this. She lifted a small USB from her bag but froze. Her eyes fixed on a black SUV parked at the far end of the lot. That wasn't there earlier, she muttered. And then she was gone. Slammed the door, vanished between rows of cars. I didn't need to chase her. I'd seen enough to know they were monitoring everyone who touched the story. An hour later, the second front opened. A local blog dropped an article titled, Zephyr Caldwell Crashes Engagement Party Disrupts Family Celebration. It painted me as a bitter heir, lashing out, pushing false accusations, jeopardizing Wesley's wedding out of spite. Right on cue, Iris Kane emailed me with her signature arrogance wrapped in legalese. We believe it's in everyone's interest to de-escalate. If you agree to step back from CML, we will ensure this narrative does not gain wider traction. Let's protect your legacy quietly. I deleted it. If they thought I was afraid of being dragged, they forgot that I already drowned once. I wasn't going under again. That evening, Wesley texted me. Just coordinates, no explanation. A bar downtown where the light was always low and cameras were discouraged. He was already 2 drinks in when I arrived. You need to stop, he said without looking at me. You're making Tatum nervous. The Rowlands have lawyers reviewing exit clauses. I stirred my drink. Are you here to negotiate? I'm here to ask what the hell you're doing. I let the silence settle before asking, do you know the name Harbor Bridge Solutions? His reaction was genuine, confused, blank. No. Should I? You should, if you're going to inherit a company bleeding money through it. He shifted. All I know is Dad's been pulling strings. He said it's temporary, that it's all to keep things stable. Stable for who, I asked, you or him? He didn't answer, because he didn't want to. Because wanting the wedding, the name, the throne, it all meant more to him than the truth ever would. That night, Cassian called. They're making moves, he said. Your father's filed for a temporary injunction to block your management rights. On what grounds? That you're mentally unfit, that you're being manipulated, that your return is motivated by personal vendetta, not corporate governance. A familiar ache opened in my ribs. I remembered 5 years ago when they whispered that I was unwell, when they fed the press and the partners the story that I'd cracked under pressure. This wasn't new. This was a rerun with higher stakes. I needed leverage and I needed it fast. The next morning, I brought the note from my mother's trust to a specialist in estate law. He read it carefully. If this trust exists, he said, there will be physical documentation, a will of filing, a bank record. These things can't vanish completely. So I made a list. First, the law office that handled the Caldwell estate. Second, the vault at Charleston Federal where the family kept records. Third, the locked archive room at Magnolia Crest itself. Before I left, I returned to the study in the west wing of the manor, the room Gordon used to call his sanctum. The drawers were locked. New locks, too. Fresh shine on the metal. I found the wall safe hidden behind a painting. It had pry marks recent. Someone had tried to get in or had already succeeded. When I finally cracked it open, it was empty, except for a torn scrap of paper wedged in the bottom. It read, Lake Jocassee has been sold. The page smelled faintly of mildew and cedar. I knew that place, a lakeside cabin, a place my mother loved, and now it was gone. The war room was a windowless conference space in CML's Charleston office. The walls were covered in printouts, string maps, digital forensics logs. Cassian had his best people stationed across disciplines legal financial data security. We had 48 hours to choke the artery before the infection reached the heart. I gave them one directive: freeze everything related to Harbor Bridge. Cassian nodded to his team. No loose ends, no silent approvals. We hold the gate. Within an hour, the fightback began. Dane Mercer sent a company-wide memo blaming operational delays on unauthorized interventions by my office. He framed the vendor freeze as reckless and cited urgent shipping disruptions as proof. The board started buzzing. One major partner sent a notice of concern implying a breach of SLA terms. It was a classic hostage situation play ball, or the company bleeds out. Cassian looked at me. We either cave or we prove where the poison's coming from. His IT forensics team struck gold. Buried in archived transfers was a routing path that ran through a trust account styled like a generic family office. But the beneficiary A holding company registered under a different name, one linked to Marla through a side investment fund she managed 10 years ago. It wasn't just fraud now, it was embezzlement. But the clock ticked louder. Our legal counsel received word that the court had accepted Gordon's injunction request for urgent consideration. He'd built a file claiming I was unstable, guided by an outside influence Cassian, and incapable of objective leadership. This wasn't just about the courtroom. This was about headlines. They weren't trying to win legally. They were trying to drown me in narrative. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake the paper from the safe Lake Jockasee has been sold. Something about that sentence gnawed at me. Cassian and I drove upstate. The cabin had always been my mother's retreat. But now it sat empty, its windows boarded. We tracked the sale through county records, transferred to a property shell through an expedited transaction. The broker, a tired man in khakis and a fleece vest, remembered something else. There was a woman, he said, mid-50s, signed for the seller, said she had power of attorney. Think her name was Marla. He even remembered the car, a black sedan with Charleston plates. Back in the car, I felt the edges of something dangerous starting to coalesce. This wasn't just about protecting Wesley's rise, I said. They sold her memory, her space, her peace. They used it to plug the gaps, Cassian said. And now they want you to walk away before you connect it all. I wouldn't. I couldn't. We drew up two parallel action plans. The first, respond to the injunction by filing a countermotion proving fiduciary intent. I had to show that I wasn't retaliating, I was protecting the company from quantifiable fraud. The second, verify the origin of my mother's trust, obtain the missing signature pages, and make it public that her assets were being misappropriated. That night as we drove back toward Charleston, Cassian's phone rang. His lawyer had recovered a near-complete copy of the trust document filed with a former associate at a firm in Atlanta. Everything matched, except the signature page, which was missing. The attorney remembered Gordon requesting it for review years ago and never returning it. I stared out the window, the headlights blurring as we passed dark woods and empty roads. Then my phone buzzed. Voicemail. Tatum. Her voice was cold. If you don't bring the truth forward, I'll go digging myself. And when I do, the wedding won't be the only thing we cancel. I replayed it twice. This was no longer an internal audit. This was war. The morning of the hearing, I arrived at the war room before anyone else. The air smelled like stress and old coffee. Half the lights were still off. This wasn't just a legal maneuver anymore, this was a firewall between truth and erasure. The IT forensics team had wrapped up their final sweeps overnight. Email chains were copied, server data mirrored, and every vendor payment tied to Harbor Bridge was cleanly logged with a proper chain of custody. The independent auditors sealed their preliminary report, flagging not just suspicious payments, but structural risk tied directly to vendor manipulation. Cassian stood by, calm but alert. He wouldn't testify unless absolutely necessary. We both knew the moment they painted him as the puppet master, the whole case risked collapsing into a soap opera. When we stepped into the courthouse, my father already had his chessboard laid out. His lawyers came out swinging, arguing that I'd returned not as a responsible stakeholder, but as a spiteful child throwing a tantrum over a wedding. that I lacked the experience for large-scale corporate decisions and that my recent orders like freezing vendor contracts were reckless and disruptive. They painted Cassian as the whispering devil on my shoulder, a manipulator with financial motives. I didn't react. That was their trap. They wanted me emotional, defensive, off balance. Then the judge called in Wesley. He looked polished, like a man groomed for public trust. But when questioned about covenant limits, supplier substitution protocols, and why certain vendors were approved without board sign-off, he froze. I'm not sure. I wasn't involved in those specifics. The courtroom stirred. One of the Roland representatives leaned toward another and whispered something sharp. The cracks were showing. I took the stand next. No dramatics, no mention of fountains or family. Just numbers, clauses, and documented facts. I explained how diverting payments through Harbor Bridge and its related shells would break CML's lending covenants within 60 days. I highlighted the insurance policy exclusions that would strip our supply chain coverage if fraud was proven. Then I laid out the physical addresses, how Harbor Bridge and 2 other vendors shared not only a building, but administrative contacts. The overlap was so flagrant it practically confessed. The judge leaned forward. His tone changed. He no longer saw a messy family brawl. He saw corporate risk mitigation. Then Cassian's legal team presented the forensic trail consultancy fees funneled through a family office trust linked to Marla. My father's attorneys objected, claimed it was circumstantial, but the data was clean. The audit firm had verified its integrity. And when Marla was asked directly if she had any connection to Harbor Bridge, she didn't answer. She scoffed. She looked away. But she didn't answer. The tension shifted. This wasn't about who was right anymore. It was about who had something to hide. In the closing arguments, my father's lawyer tried to swing the pendulum back. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "isn't it true you've long felt alienated by your family, that this is your way of punishing them?" I didn't flinch. No. It's true that I've felt alienated. It's also true that my mother trusted this company to people who have drained it. I came back because I have a responsibility to stop that. My father glared at me like he wanted to burn through the walls, but the performance didn't land this time. The judge ruled the injunction request was denied, save for limited areas where oversight would be maintained. I retained full authority to continue my audit to freeze high-risk vendors and to enforce new financial controls pending further review. But before I even left the building, the counterstrike landed. Iris Kane released a press piece within minutes. "The Caldwell legacy under siege, Zephyr Caldwell stages corporate coup." Accompanied by a photo of me looking tired, framed to make me seem ruthless. I barely glanced at it. My phone buzzed again. A private meeting had been scheduled that night. At a hotel conference room in downtown Charleston. Present the full CML board, the Roland family legal counsel, and everyone who had something to gain or lose in this war. And as I was leaving the courthouse, my attorney handed me a second envelope, inside a near-complete trust document. It was all there, except one thing. The final signature page had been torn out, deliberately. The hotel conference room was cool, modern, and intentionally impersonal. Unlike the family estate, this place had no ghosts in the walls, no shadows of my childhood, no roses trimmed by guilt. I stood at the head of the table. Across from me sat Gordon, Marla, Wesley, and Tatum. Alongside them, 2 Roland delegates with resting expressions of calculation. On my side, the board members of CML, our legal counsel, and the lead forensic auditors. Cassian sat off to the side, expression unreadable. I opened without pleasantries. This meeting will be recorded and transcribed. 2 agendas. First, financial misconduct tied to Harbor Bridge Solutions. Second, the trust of my late mother. No one objected. The auditors began. Page after page, they laid out the vendor collusion. Money routed through shell entities. Payments misclassified as consulting. Files scrubbed and re-entered. Then they addressed Dane Mercer. "We've traced multiple approvals to your credentials. Either you signed them knowingly or someone used your access." Dane looked around the room. No one came to his defense. "I was told to expedite," he said finally, "by Gordon. And Marla handled the consulting paperwork. I wasn't looped on the funding source. His voice cracked. They said it would keep operations fluid. And just like that, the dam broke. One of the Rowland lawyers turned to Tatum and whispered urgently. She didn't look at me, but her eyes were glassy. The Rowlands laid their cards on the table. If CML is implicated in active fraud, the spokesperson said we will suspend all joint ventures, advertising arrangements, and wedding endorsements. Wesley looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. You told me it was stable, he whispered to Gordon. You said it was all temporary. Because it was supposed to be, Gordon hissed, until he showed up. But I wasn't done. My lawyer stood and held up the document I'd been handed. This, he said, is a nearly complete copy of Rebecca Caldwell's trust document. It was found in the family firm's microfilm archive. The final signature page is missing, but every pagination mark, every register confirms it existed. He slid the copy forward. Our office then requested a secondary archive from a bank that held a backup. And from that source, we recovered the signed final page. He placed the last page on the table. It bore my mother's name, her handwriting, and the notarized seal of a Charleston official. It was real. I pulled out one more piece. A handwritten letter from my mother to me, short, but unmistakably hers. If this trust survives me, protect it the way I once protected you. I let the room breathe in the silence. Then I added the final puzzle pieces. The Lake Jocassee property was sold by a representative acting on Marla's behalf. The funds were never disclosed to the board. They were rerouted to CML accounts and marked as operating infusions. I didn't accuse, I didn't dramatize. I named what happened: theft, breach, deception. I looked at the board. I'm not asking you to choose between me and Gordon. I'm asking you to protect this company. When I think back on that night, I don't remember the sting of the water as much as I remember the sound of people clapping. Not because it hurt my pride, but because it showed me how easy it is for a room to forget someone's humanity. And maybe that's the part we all recognize the moment we realize we're not being seen as a person anymore, just a problem to manage, a joke, to share a story, to spin. But here's what stayed with me after the lawyers and the meetings and the headlines faded. I didn't win because I crushed anyone. I won because I stopped begging to belong in places that only loved me when I was quiet. Sometimes what changes a life isn't revenge, it's clarity. The kind that helps us walk away without hatred and still keep our heart intact. If this story sat with you in any way, I'd love to know you're here. If you feel like it, leave a few words in the comments, maybe where you're watching from, or a moment you had to choose yourself. And if you want, you can subscribe, not as a favor to me, but as a way to join a small corner of the internet where we listen first and speak gently when we're ready. Thanks for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.